Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Conservatives say they're angry at the Liberals for trying to push through changes to an assisted dying bill without properly consulting with physicians. The Alberta government announced that close to 700,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines will be available very soon. And a powerful interview with a former U.S. Marine who discusses how he almost took his own life while battling post-traumatic stress disorder.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A group of physicians say they were turned away from providing their input on proposed changes to Canada's assisted dying law. Conservative MP Michael Cooper says it's a prime example of the Liberals trying to rush ahead on a bill without proper consultation or consideration. And after that, we could have grave consequences for Canadians.
There are significant concerns that Bill C7 will eviscerate key safeguards that were passed by Parliament a short 4.5 years ago. It is why every national disabilities rights organization opposes Bill C7. It's why the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has expressed concern about Canada's medical assistance in dying regime. It's why more than 900 physicians have penned a letter expressing their opposition to Bill C7.
Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre says Canadians who worked and earned an income during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic should have paid taxes that went to people who may have fraudulently claimed the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the plan was to always catch fraudsters.
Those who lost their jobs because of COVID shutdowns should have been helped with the CERB. But everyone should also believe that those hardworking people earning minimum wage, bagging groceries, or doing other essential work shouldn't pay taxes to send CERB checks to prisoners or suspected fraud cases. And now we find that the government sent out 800,000 CERB checks to people who had not even filed taxes in the preceding year, failing to prove they were eligible for that money. What did the government do to ensure that the money didn't go to people who didn't earn the right to receive it?
Mr. Speaker, our income support programs have played a fundamental role in getting Canadians through the first wave of the COVID crisis, and they're going to get Canadians through the second wave. When it comes to fraud, that is completely unacceptable, and the hardworking public servants in the CRA are doing an outstanding job, and they are going to make sure that all claims are legitimate.
Here in Alberta, the UCP announced today that effective immediately, the province is banning carding and establishing clear rules for interactions between police and the public. These changes will ban police in Alberta from randomly stopping members of the public asking for personal information, which is also known as carding. The province is moving swiftly in response to concerns that carding and street checks unfairly target members of racialized and marginalized communities. Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh commented on the carding ban earlier today.
Anyone who's talked to me before, I don't look at the past. If there has been problems in the past, obviously it's not going to be the way of the future for Lethbridge Police Service. As an immigrant myself and somebody who came to this country, I see the value of making sure every citizen gets the respect that they deserve. I can also share with you, bringing policies and legislation is great. It's just about making sure that we adhere to them and also hold people accountable when they are not doing so. So that's the most important part, that from Lethbridge Police Standards, we will continue to monitor the situation to make sure all our officers and employees have full respect for every citizen here, and those who are not will be held accountable.
The Alberta government announced that our province will be receiving close to 700,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccine early next year. Alberta, which has a population of 4.4 million, would receive 465,000 doses from Pfizer and 221,000 from Moderna. Over the past week, both pharmaceutical companies said their vaccines are around 95% effective in trials. They still have to undergo regulatory review and approval. Officials say the total number of COVID-19 deaths in Alberta is now at 451. There are also almost 10,400 active coronavirus cases in our province. In Lethbridge, there are currently 163 active COVID-19 cases. With the Lethbridge mask bylaw being enforced for almost 3 months now, there's been controversy surrounding who can and cannot wear a mask. A Lethbridge woman says she's experiencing animosity and bullying from stores because she can't wear a mask due to medical reasons. As Micah Quinn explains now, she says she will not be allowed inside of the stores without a mask.
Shonita Sims says she can't wear a mask because she suffered severe trauma from her childhood, and anything on her face or touching her face causes severe anxiety.
I can't even wear a face shield at this point. I do want to, and I feel bad for not being able to wear anything, but I can't do it. When I went into Costco, I had just recently got a new membership, and then they changed the mask bylaw. When they did that, I explained my situation to them. They did not understand, and they didn't show any sympathy. I went into Chapters Indigo, and I did have a medical exemption letter, and I did explain the Lethbridge bylaw, and even with all of that, they said, no, you cannot come into the store.
Bridge City News reached out to Costco and Chapters Indigo to ask them what their mask policies are in store, but we have yet to hear back. Under the current Lethbridge mask bylaw, it states that a person who can't wear a face mask due to medical reasons doesn't have to in a public area, and this is protected under the Alberta Human Rights Act. Sims started a Facebook group for people like herself who cannot wear a face mask.
In fact, it seems to be there's a decreasing amount of information for people like myself, and I was feeling very frustrated and very alone, very isolated. And so I started this group as a way for people like myself to get together to support one another.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
When it comes to supporting small business throughout the pandemic, the government of Alberta has to do a better job of it. Now, that's what our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says is the sentiment from the Alberta NDP. Dawson says the opposition has some ideas as to how we can better support those business owners.
One of the issues with a big long-term shutdown or frankly even a short shutdown is if that's going to happen, either businesses are going to be in a considerable amount of trouble or the government's going to have to put out a bunch of money to support them. So the NDP is calling for a couple things. They want, for example, there is a ban on commercial evictions back in the spring, and that has since lapsed. So they are asking for those rules to be brought back in. They're asking for, a suspension on cutting off utilities and things like that for commercial tenants.
Catch the full interview with our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, who will also discuss how Dr. Deena Hinshaw has asked police chiefs to help enforce the new non-voluntary COVID-19 measures in place. That interview is coming up later in our program. Today marks World Pancreatic Cancer Day. It coincides with the death of Jeopardy host Alex Trebek, who passed away from the deadly disease just over a week ago. A Lethbridge woman who was a guest on Jeopardy last February says Trebek was a kind-hearted man even when he was dealing with the disease.
He was about a year into his diagnosis when I taped back in February. I thought he looked really good at the time, and he was very, very congenial. He does a Q&A with the audience as part of the taping process for each show. Comes out in the middle of one of the commercial breaks and takes questions, and he's quite funny and engaging. And he was the same way with the contestants. He and I chatted a little bit about being Canadian and the fact that that game show lottery winnings are not taxed in Canada, which is kind of a wonderful thing. And after the show is over, he comes over and congratulates the winner and has a little bit of a chit chat with the contestants. So it was quite engaging and congenial, and I thought he was a very nice guy.
According to the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition, the survival rate for someone with pancreatic cancer is around 5 years or less. As you may have already noticed, most Christmas-related events have gone virtual due to the pandemic. The CP Holiday Train is one of those events. The Holiday Train, in concert to collect donations for local food banks, will be hosting a virtual concert for the first time in its 21-year history.
We are going to have performances by the Trues and Serena Ryder. They are our headliners for the concert. We have Logan Statz, Holiday Train favorite Kelly Prescott, JoJo Mason, excellent Canadian lineup of performers. And, it's going to be a virtual concert. I feel like in the COVID-19 world, we're seeing more of these virtual concert lineups. So it's going to be just like, what people are seeing recently. We will still have our beautiful train of lights all lit up. Everyone will be performing on the holiday train stage. And we're really looking forward to seeing how it all turns out.
Since 1999, the CP Holiday Train has raised nearly $18 million for local food banks across Canada and the United States. The wardrobe of a farmer is likely to include a little bit of classic flannel. Alberta nonprofit AG for Life is running a social media contest called Farmers in Flannel. It aims to thank farmers for their hard work post-harvest during a pandemic. They're asking farmers and their families to post their most creative shots wearing flannel using the hashtag #ChannelYourFlannel for a chance to win, you guessed it, more flannel.
It is the first year, and it was perfect timing. We know with COVID, a lot of people are at home and looking, for some fun distractions. So the contest has given a lot of people a chance to sort of show off their flannel and support Alberta farmers, to showcase agriculture and to highlight the hard work of farmers in our province. We know with COVID, we've seen probably for the first time for many people, the insecurity of food when you've gone to the grocery store and the shelves have been empty, and it's really raised food and food access to a lot of people's minds. And so having this contest is just a great way to, again, raise the profile of agriculture and showcase its importance in our lives.
The contest runs until November 30th, and the winners will be announced on December the 1st. Due to the recent spike in COVID-19 cases, Manitoba's economic recovery will be delayed until at least the year 2022. That's according to the Conference Board of Canada. The board's latest economic outlook says Manitoba's real gross domestic product is expected to fall by 6.2% this year. It is only expected to rise by 3.5% next year. That is much slower than Canada's rebound of 5.6%. Manitoba reported 475 new cases along with 8 new deaths. It continues to have the highest per capita COVID infection rate in all of Canada. The Saskatchewan government is rejecting a call from the NDP to order non-essential businesses to close for 3 weeks to slow the spread of COVID-19. NDP leader Ryan Miley says new measures announced yesterday fall short of helping the healthcare system cope with the rise in infections. They include the mandatory use of masks in public indoor places across the province and cutting the number of people allowed to gather in a home from 10 to 5. Health officials say they're taking action to avoid a province-wide shutdown that would put thousands of people out of work. Saskatchewan reported 98 new cases of the virus today. More people are waiting for long hours and long lines in the United States to get tested for the novel coronavirus. Cases continue to surge south of the border leading up to the holidays.
I've been in line for about 4 hours. Me and her, we actually came here this morning, around 8 o'clock this morning. To be honest, it is very frustrating. Honestly, I just think that they could take a better approach about, especially during winter time, about standing in line right now, because even standing in here, you could even have a cold or get a cold just by standing outside.
You got to talk to people in line. That's the key to making the line move fast. Yeah, it seems like people are, the public consciousness is increasing and people are getting tested more because of that.
PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. You've likely heard of the condition and how it's impacted so many of our first responders and military personnel. Now, there's a man in Texas, Chad Robichaud, who wrote a book on his battle with PTSD and how it almost caused him to take his own life.
I was the common denominator. The problem was me. And that led me to make this thought to come over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. And I made a decision I was going to take my life. That same, hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That somehow our family, some of our loved ones would think they'd be sad without us, but they would be better off. And again, I decided I was going to take my life. And I would sit in my closet. I had my family pictures I'd put on my floor around me. And I had a Glock 22, which is a 40 caliber pistol. And I tried to build up the courage to pull that trigger.
Don't miss this powerful interview with Chad Robichaud, author of the book An Unfair Advantage, A Victory in the Midst of a Battle, coming up in the second half of our show. Celebrations erupted in Azerbaijan following news of a ceasefire with Armenia. Ethnic Armenians returned to their homeland a week after the ceasefire halted fighting that had raged over the separatist region for more than 6 weeks. The Moscow brokered truce called for territorial concessions in favor of Azerbaijan and left many Armenians bitter, but allowed those who fled from violence to return to their homes. Russian and Turkish peacekeepers have been deployed to both Armenia and Azerbaijan to help keep order. Nagorno-Karabakh lies within Azerbaijan, but has been under the control of ethnic Armenian forces since the separatist war there ended in 1994. Rengasul Yobek sat in an elementary school in Palau on a sweltering afternoon earlier this year before the COVID-19 pandemic swept the globe. The school's 76 students assembled there to receive gift-filled shoeboxes at the first Operation Christmas Child event to take place on the Western Pacific island nation. The sight of the excited kids reminded him of his own childhood growing up in an isolated village on the northeastern shore of Palau.
This is the village that I grew up most of my life. This is the road that we used to play. This is the trees that we used to play hide and seek or play with our friends after school in this little jungle behind me. People are friendly, they just want to be your friend. Yesterday we did an Operation Christmas Child distribution here in my village called Niwal. The gifts is a tangible way of communicating to the kids the love of Christ, that Jesus loves them, and the love that he has for them, nobody can take it away from them. We hardly see anything like this happening with our village. And for Operation Christmas Child to come throughout Palau, giving out the gifts and the lessons that the Christ journey brings so much joy and hope. We want all the children to hear Christ built upon this rock that he says on his word, because they really are the ones that will carry the message across into the future.
Great to see the smile on those kids' faces. It's hard to believe that Christmas is less than 5 weeks away, isn't it? In our household, the classic song Felix Navidad could always be heard as we gathered and decorated the Christmas tree. Jose Feliciano is celebrating 50 years of his bilingual Christmas classic Felix Navidad. He said he wanted to write a song that would really touch people's hearts.
The idea of Felix Navidad was to try and unite the people. My thought when I wrote the song was that it didn't matter what language you were singing in, the feeling of Christmas is privy to all of us. Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad. Jingle bells, the first Noel, We Three Kings, those are the songs that when I learned them in school, stuck into my ribs. That's why when I did a Christmas album, I didn't want to do a Christmas album that was syrupy, that really told the story of the Savior's birth in a way that was musical and people could get behind it.
It was feeling a little bit like Christmas today with the fresh snow we received. It was overcast with light flurries in some regions of southwestern Alberta, and the white stuff should be ending and warmer days are ahead. Full weather details are coming up. You know, my back is still sore from all of that shoveling I did over the weekend. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the winter storm warning is over, but more snow may be on the way for our region, so maybe I shouldn't put that shovel away just yet.
No, do not put that shovel away yet, Hal, because we have 2 more centimeters of the cold white stuff headed our way tomorrow. And some blowing snow this evening as well, with the westerly wind gusting to 60 kilometers per hour, increasing clouds near midnight. And then into tomorrow morning, that's where we're going to be seeing those periods of snow up to 2 centimeters, like I mentioned. Blowing snow as well. 0 degrees is our high tomorrow, 11 degrees the overnight low into tomorrow evening. And then Wednesday, Remembrance Day, is when we're not going to see any more snow, at least for now anyways. Partly cloudy skies on Wednesday, -8 is the high, 0 the high for Thursday under sunny skies, and then partly cloudy skies for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with the weekend finally putting us more into that average range, that average high range for this time of year of 6 degrees for both Saturday and Sunday. So like I said, the almanac tells us 6 degrees should be the average high for this time of year. We'll be there on the weekend. -6 is the low temperature. 18 degrees was our high temperature back in 1987, and our chilliest day on record, -28 right there back in 1945. Sun rose this morning at 7:34 a.m. and our evening sunset tonight at 4:56 p.m. Look at that. We are actually getting into the 4 o'clock hour for those sunsets. So let's take a look at what's happening across the nation here. Victoria and Vancouver could both see some chance of showers there as they're getting over a frontal system with Arctic air that came in earlier today. That should be gone by tonight. Edmonton and Calgary could see 2 to 4 centimeters of snow this evening. Saskatoon and Regina, -8, -10. Going to feel a lot chillier in the morning though with that wind chill. -25, -27 is what it's going to feel like. Winnipeg's high, -4 tomorrow under partly cloudy skies. Now we're going to see some nice temperatures over here. Let's take a look at Toronto. Sunshine at 21 degrees, 21 for Montreal as well, and 20 degrees for our friends over in Ottawa under sunny skies. So get your sunglasses out, guys. Same thing for Atlantic Canada. We're looking at much better weather over there than we certainly are in the prairies. 20 expected to be the high for Fredericton, sunny skies. Mix of sun and cloud in Halifax with a high of 20, 18 degrees in Charlottetown expected tomorrow. St. John's, Newfoundland could see 11-degree high with a mix of sun and cloud. Could see some 60-kilometer-per-hour wind gusts as well. So there you go. That is your weather.
North American stocks are surging on the burst of hope following encouraging information about a potential COVID-19 vaccine. Pfizer announced today that an early peek at its vaccine data suggests it may be 90% effective at preventing the virus. The company cautions, however, the initial protection rate might change by the time the study ends, and the announcement does not mean a vaccine is imminent. But the S&P 500 was up over 3% in trading today and was on track to close at a record for the first time in more than 2 months. Federal Industry Minister Navidad says Ottawa is serious about airlines refunding customers as a condition for federal support to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
We want to make it very clear, and Canadians have been very clear with us, that any support for the sector that is going through a very challenging time, that they step up and support Canadians who are also struggling, and that these refunds should be provided to their customers as soon as possible. So this is one issue that we put right at the beginning of our conversations with the airline industry to say you need to address this issue. And then our goal and objective is to make sure we have a competitive airline industry, so when we do have the economic recovery and when we do have the rebound, that we have a strong rebound and a strong airline industry.
Air Canada is trimming the number of planes in its fleet. It is also looking to grow its cargo business as it wrestles with an 88% drop in passenger traffic due to the pandemic. The Montreal-based airline says it lost $685 million in the July to September quarter, which is normally quite profitable. That compares with a profit of $636 million a year ago. Third quarter sales fell 86% to $757 million. The company says it hopes to save around $3 billion by the year 2023 by retiring 79 older aircraft and canceling or delaying the purchase of new planes. General Motors is recalling more than 217,000 vehicles in Canada and the United States because a transmission leak can potentially cause the vehicle to stop or catch on fire. The recall includes certain versions of the 2018 through 2020 Chevy Equinox and Traverse. It also includes the GMC Terrain, the Chevy Malibu, Cruze, Blazer, various Buick models, and Cadillacs were also affected. GM says 2 bolts may be missing from the start-stop mechanism, allowing the fluid to leak. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 193 points in the day to finish at 16,475. The Dow was up 834 to 29,157. The S&P 500 was up 41 points to 3550, and the Nasdaq was down 181 to 11,713. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 268 to 39.82 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to 2.86 US. Gold was down 3 cents as well to 1863.02 US an ounce, and silver was unchanged at 24.11 US an ounce. Wheat is at $265 per metric ton. Barley's also at $265. Canola is at $5.43, and corn is at $272 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $3.18 to $111.83. Feeder cattle were up $4.80 to $140.73, and lean hogs were up 70 cents to $65.60. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 76.89 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, it was snow day in Lethbridge. The Lethbridge School Division canceled classes as school buses were not running. In-person classes were also canceled at Lethbridge College and at the University of Lethbridge. And now it's reading week, however, at the U of L. The winter storm that went through our region dumped up to 20 centimeters of snow in the city and up to 40 centimeters in the Crow's Nest Pass. There are tips to help you stretch your dollar if you're one of the many who lost their job due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Up next, Jeanette Rocher chats with an author who lost her job and came up with creative ways of saving money. That interview is on deck. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News Community Calendar. A fundraiser for the Lethbridge Food Bank is taking place Tuesday, November 10th at Honker's Pub and Eatery beginning at 7 p.m. Come and support a worthy cause and listen to great live music showcasing local bands. Honker's will have a featured meal and drink with a portion of the sales going to the Lethbridge Food Bank, along with a donation box and bin for non-perishable food items. A $10 cover charge will also be taken. COVID-19 measures will be observed with hand sanitizer and temperature checks. It's that time of year again. The Old Man River Potters Guild Christmas sale is taking place from November 12th to the 15th at number 2, 4416 First Avenue South. Find that unique gift for someone special. This sale features a wide assortment of pottery and ceramics. For details, visit oldmanriverpottersguild.com. The Juno Beach Centre is Canada's only museum in Normandy dedicated to honouring the contributions of 1.1 million men and women who served during World War II. This year, support a worthy cause and take part in the Remembrance Day races, being held until November 28th. You can register for one of 3 virtual race distances, each with its own special meaning. Participants will receive a race kit that includes a commemorative medal, a Juno Beach collector coin, a bracelet, and more. For details and to register, visit junobeach.org. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Life is often filled with challenges, unexpected events, sickness, job loss, death, broken families, and the list goes on. Responses to these difficulties vary widely, from the extreme of suicide to recovery and building a successful life. Today's guests are no stranger to this. Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad is a former Force Recon Marine who served 8 tours of duty in Afghanistan, a former police officer and champion mixed martial arts fighter. He's also the author of An Unfair Advantage: Victory in the Midst of Battle. Chad and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us via Skype from the Woodlands, Texas, right?
Yes, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. So first of all, can you give us a brief snapshot of what your book is about and who it's for?
Yeah, well, my book is about a lot of my experiences through life as a Marine, my time in Afghanistan, my time as a professional fighter, and a lot of challenges I faced in life, which are no different than many people challenges people face in their everyday life. But more importantly, how do we move forward? I found myself suffering with some of the same things that many military warriors suffer with today. In the United States, we have over 20 suicides per day. Divorce rates are over 80% in combat veterans. Those being diagnosed with PTSD is 30 to 40%. So a lot of people are struggling with a lot of things. And I found a way forward through the restoration of my faith, through a relationship with Christ, and applying biblical principles in my life that helped me to move forward. So I share all that in the book, and just really laying a pathway forward for those who struggle with all of life's issues.
Wow. So tell us a bit about the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which you and your wife decided to start.
Yes, after my time coming home from Afghanistan, like I said, we faced many things as a family with my diagnosis of PTSD, a near divorce in our family, my personal battle with suicide, and then on the other side of that, finding hope and restoration in our family and the ability to move forward. We want to share that, what we discovered, with others. And so we founded Mighty Oaks Foundation. It was almost 10 years ago now. We've run both resiliency and recovery programs. In our resiliency programs, I speak on active duty military bases around the world. I've spoken about 150,000 active duty troops, given away about 100,000 copies of my books in these events. We get lots of requests from units all over the world and to do those programs. And then we have recovery programs where we run 30 camps per year. Our camps are 6 days long. They're non-clinical, faith-based peer-to-peer mentoring programs. And we've had over 4,000 people come through those programs between active duty, military veterans, and spouses. And Kathy's, and her team's able to talk to a lot of the spouses about what they struggle with on the spouse side of things.
Chad, what kinds of things did you experience in Afghanistan that ended up causing the post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, I think for me, it was going to Afghanistan and not being completely prepared. The military talks about the pillars of resiliency: mind, body, spirit, social, being mentally tough, physically tough, having a strong spiritual foundation, and being surrounded by the right people in a social network. I think I would have believed I was prepared in all those areas, but for me, my spiritual foundation was broken. I didn't really have a relationship with God as I should have going into that environment and being exposed to such evil atrocities that you see in a place like Afghanistan. And over time, those things made me angry. They made me frustrated. I became very intense and person, and those things being not rectified or unchecked in my life began to manifest in physiological symptoms, which later began as panic attacks and eventually being diagnosed with PTSD. I lost some team members there. A lot of Afghans that worked for me were killed there, and just the loss of friends, seeing things, the oppression of the Afghan people, the just hardships on the Afghan people that the Taliban imposed on them, particularly the sexual molestation of children and the way the Taliban, treat the Afghan people, really made me have a hatred inside of me that just surfaced and manifested in all these symptoms that I dealt with PTSD.
Right. Now, did you know that you had PTSD?
I knew something was wrong. I mean, I didn't diagnose myself with PTSD. In 2007, PTSD wasn't a very common term. I knew people lost their minds, went crazy, went over the edge, and I felt myself slipping in that way, and I felt it getting worse and worse over time. The physiological effects were, numbness in my arms and face, feel like my throat was swelling shut, and the inability to breathe, feel like you're gonna have a heart attack. And as there's progressed, it got to where I'd almost wake up out of a fog during intense times of operations, and it's something known as disassociation, to where you almost things aren't present time. You feel like they're a little delayed, and you're seeing yourself in third person. Those are all signs that I experienced early on and knew there was a problem, but I didn't want to ask for help because I didn't want to be viewed to my peers as weak and even pulled from doing my job. So I tried to push it down and continue operating. Only things got worse, and eventually the wheels flew off for me, and I had to come home and face that diagnosis.
Yeah. Now, you served 8 tours in Afghanistan. So, Kathy, what did you observe in Chad when he returned from these overseas deployments?
At first, it was different than what you would think it was. He came home. He was very quiet, kind of not his normal self. Very quiet. Just needed an atmosphere that was a little more peaceful, which was really hard with 3 young kids. He was actually seeking comfort for the first 3 months. So I knew something was wrong with him. And he'll probably share a little bit more. It wasn't until after, a year into this, maybe a little less than that I thought what this post-traumatic thing that he had was over and done with, because that quiet time, the peaceful time that we needed to provide kind of ended. And we had started our own mixed martial arts gym that he got really involved in. So I thought that whatever he was dealing with was over and done with. But what had happened was it all turned into raging anger. And in our home, it was a scary place to be. There was a fake facade he was putting on the outside. And what hurt most is I knew the truth. I knew what was happening on the inside. I knew what was happening to our marriage. For the next 3 years, it was crumbling. But I have to say, though, we didn't have a solid foundation to begin with. We got married young. I was 18, he was 19. I had 3 kids by the time I was 22. I knew how to be a mom, and I knew how to somewhat be a wife and run my home. But when it came to handling this post-traumatic stress thing in the anger realm and what he was going through and have grace for him, I was not successful at.
Right. Now, how did this affect your marriage?
Yeah, so about 3 years into it, unfortunately, he stepped outside of our marriage and into relationships with other women. And for me, I was done with that. So you put the anger on, the atmosphere of what was going on in our home, the destruction of the family, the kids being emotionally hurt every day, and then the lies and betrayal. I finally said enough was enough, and that's when our marriage finally came to a point that we put our house up for sale, and I moved into my own place, and he moved into his place, and I went ahead and filed divorce papers a little while later.
Chad, tell us about the turning point in your life when you were separated from your wife, living in an apartment, and you were considering suicide. Your wife actually visited your apartment. What did she say to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that time apart, living in separate places, really gave me a time to reflect on the damage I had done to my wife, my children, and really coming to the conclusion that, I was the common denominator. The problem was me. And that led me to make this thought to come over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. And I made a decision I was going to take my life. That same, hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That somehow our family, somehow our loved ones would think they'd be sad without us, but they would be better off. And again, I decided I was going to take my life. And I would sit in my closet. I had my family pictures I'd put on my floor around me. And I had a Glock 22, which is a 40 caliber pistol. And I tried to build up the courage to pull that trigger. And the one thing that kept me from doing it was the knowledge that someone would actually find me. I mean, you're going to go missing, or someone's going to hear the gunshot. And the only person that had a key to my apartment at the time was my son, Hunter. So I couldn't imagine my kid finding me that way. And that would be enough to pump the brakes. But the next day I was back at that thought again and that desire to end my life. And it was during one of those moments that my wife knocked at my door and interrupted me being in that moment. And I answered the door, and we got into an argument because we were arguing about everything at a time. And in the middle of that argument, she asked me a question that, challenged me and probably saved my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me go into special operations and the amount of discipline and work it took to do that, training for MMA fights and being successful, winning a world title and all these things that she saw me do in my life that took so much discipline and hard work. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And that question really challenged me. I'd been successful in professional things. When it came to the most important things, being a husband, being a father, being, for me, that young 17-year-old kid that went to Marine Corps boot camp and made oath to the Marine Corps, my country, myself, to do something important in my life. I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. And I made a radical decision in that moment that I was going to work hard, use that same discipline and work ethic to put my life back together. It had nothing to do with my faith at the time. I just knew that I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I was surrounded by. I needed accountability in my life. And Kathy introduced me to a man named Steve from her church she was going to, that stepped into my life and began to mentor me and really challenge me and help me to move forward. And that ultimately led to the restoration of my faith and me making a decision to really calibrate my life to the life I believe I was created to live. And that decision resulted in restoration in our marriage and in my own brokenness, having hope again to live, and ultimately what I think I've sought my whole life, and that's purpose. And we were created that purpose. We're meant to have purpose. People leave the military with a lot of purpose and mission. And when they wake up one day and they don't have it, I think that's the major result of suicide. For me, having a purpose again was instrumental in me having a desire to share with others what I had discovered. I realized so many other veterans were struggling with the same thing, and I felt a burden on my heart to pay it forward, and that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation.
That's amazing. So, Chad, what advice do you have for anyone watching right now who may be considering suicide?
Well, a simple message that there is hope. I mean, when you're in those darkest moments, you believe that no one can feel like you, no one's life can be as bad as yours. You feel like you're going to be there forever and it'll never end, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and that's just not true. There is a better day around the corner. It may not feel like it right now. It may feel like this is forever, but that's just not the case. And you can't make a permanent decision, which suicide is a very permanent decision, to temporary problems. Get help, reach out, share the things you're struggling with. I'll say from a faith-based perspective, my relationship with Christ radically saved my life. If you haven't given God a chance in your life, then, what do you have to lose? I came to this moment for me to realize I had tried everything. Nothing worked. We have a saying at Mighty Oaks Foundation, if what you're trying isn't working, why not try something different? Try something different. And for me, I would even say, give God a chance in your life.
Right. So what other preventative steps can people take to ensure consistent spiritual growth?
Accountability, fellowship. For me, I had spent a lot of time going to church, but was never in any kind of relationship or fellowship with people. And I had no accountability in my life. So I went to church to check the box. But there was no one to ensure that I was living the principles that I was, learning and preaching or saying I subscribe to. And so having accountability in your life is very important. Having someone in your life that you can be vulnerable and transparent to completely. I mean, maybe that's not your spouse. You can't always, a woman can't talk to her husband about all the things that women struggle with at times, and men can't speak to their wives about maybe some of the temptations they're having or struggles they're having. So it's important to have same-sex accountability and partnerships at a very transparent, deep level in your life to be able to walk through life together with.
Chad, where can people get a hold of your book?
Yeah, so An Unfair Advantage is available on Amazon and any of your major retail outlets, Barnes & Noble. The easiest way to get it is right there on Amazon. And get a copy. If not for yourself, for anyone that might be struggling. And part of the proceeds of getting a copy of An Unfair Advantage helps me to give books away to our troops. I've given away over 100,000 copies now, and it's awesome to see a grateful nation of Americans get behind an effort like that. If any veterans are struggling, or anybody, first responders, spouses are struggling, know that there's help. Our program, Mighty Oaks programs.org, all the programs are covered. We cover all the costs, including travel. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad is the author of An Unfair Advantage, Victory in the Midst of Battle. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us on.
COVID-19 cases continue to rise in many areas of the country, but there's an aversion to close businesses in Alberta once again. Premier Jason Kenney says many cannot afford another shutdown, so we're taking more of a patchwork approach to the pandemic. Joining me now is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, we're in the midst of a 2-week attempted reset on the case count. Will the limited measures put in place actually work?
Well, that's sort of the big question. About a week ago, a whole bunch of doctors wrote to the Premier saying what we need is what they were calling a circuit breaker, sort of a hard, sharp shutdown for about 2 weeks to try and bring these case counts under control. We've had days where there's been more than 1,000 new cases. The Premier and the government haven't gone that far. As you said, sort of citing economic reasons, the pressures of a lockdown, things like that. So what we're seeing is lockdowns, or closures, I should say, in certain places. So if you go to spin class, for example, that is closed, whereas a regular gym is still open. There are occupancy limits. The Premier's asking people to not, gather in the home. So, the criticism is, maybe this will work a little bit, maybe this will bring cases down, but is it going to be this hard reset some have called for? And that doesn't seem to be the case. But the premier and the health minister, they've been pretty consistent on this idea that they need to balance the economy with trying to get COVID under control.
NDP leader Rachel Notley is still making noise about the contact tracing app, which the UCP is pretty confident in. But a Globe and Mail report this week shows it was only used to trace 19 cases.
Yeah, that's right. So quite often when the premier or the health minister has been asked about Alberta's response, why they're not doing this, that, and the other thing, they've said, look, we started out with the best contact tracing system in the country. We're the first province to come out with an app. And they've been using this as justification for not joining in on the federal app. And their argument is the federal app doesn't mesh seamlessly with the contact tracing system here. But then, as you say, this Globe and Mail report that says only about 19 cases have really been sort of traced through this app. So there are some lingering issues with it in terms of tech issues and whether or not it could work properly on the background of smartphones and things like that. So it's possible these wrinkles will be ironed out in coming weeks. But yeah, the NDP has been hitting them hard over the last couple of weeks, saying, look, there's obviously problems with this thing. Why don't you just use the federal one? And so far, the province has been resisting that.
Now, the NDP tried and failed to get the Auditor General to appear before a legislative committee to discuss a recent report which found some account errors. Tyler, that includes over $1 million doled out to sole source contracts without justification when it comes to the war room.
Yeah, so the Auditor General put out this report, but $1.5 billion were sort of unaccounted for in the government's finances. The big one that jumped out at people was, as you say, sole source contracts from the Canadian Energy Centre. The war room has had a rough go of it for the past couple of years. They get criticized left, right, and center no matter what they do. But this was just another example of that the NDP and critics were able to seize on about the way the war room is operating. And then the other thing that really jumped out at people was folks might remember a change in when AISH payments were doled out. That's the Alberta income support for the severely handicapped. And it turned out that change was basically an accounting gimmick to count only 11 months in the fiscal year instead of a full 12 months. So, the Auditor General sort of called out some of these things. The NDP obviously upset, progressive groups obviously upset, but the UCP seems to have defeated that attempt to get the Auditor General to testify. But going forward, the NDP's social channels are talking about, fiscal responsibility and things like that. So, it's almost one of those things they say that you can waste $1 million here and there, but if you get caught with the $18 glass of orange juice, you can end up in trouble. So, no doubt we're going to see in a couple of years all this stuff coming back around in campaign documents.
Tyler, the province is hoping to speed up economic recovery by setting timelines for municipalities to deal with development permits. How will that work?
Yeah, so they've set sort of 3 hard deadlines of 20, 40, and 60 days in terms of receiving permits, getting back about permits, finally approving permits within about 60 days. The idea to get projects moving faster, get builders working faster, that sort of thing. Now, of course, people will look at that and say, oh, well, how on earth would you ever approve a new arena or something like that in 60 days? So there are still some things that a council can do to try and extend these things where it's needed. But the idea is to get the economy rolling a bit quicker, get construction going quicker. Now the NDP criticizing this, saying that, well, we trust local councillors more than the government, the provincial government, and things like that. But this is one of the red tape reduction things that the government's been going on about for the last couple of years. And again, we talk about this every week, it seems, about how they're still doing all of these governance things in the background, even as the pandemic's going on.
Many people would argue that small to medium businesses are the true backbone of our economy, and the opposition in Alberta is calling for new measures to help small business owners weather the pandemic. What kind of measures?
Yeah, so basically this goes back to what we talked about right at the beginning here with one of the issues with a big long-term shutdown or frankly even a short shutdown is if that's going to happen, either businesses are going to be in a considerable amount of trouble or the government's going to have to put out a bunch of money to support them. So the NDP is calling for a couple things. They want, for example, there was a ban on commercial evictions back in the spring, and that has since lapsed. So they are asking for those rules to be brought back in. They're asking for, a suspension on cutting off utilities and things like that for commercial tenants. Just some things that might make the pandemic a little bit easier to bear for businesses with or without a shutdown. And when we're seeing problems with small business all over the province, all over the country, I think at this point pretty much everyone knows someone who, whether they're a restaurant owner or a contractor. I mean, everyone knows someone who owns a small or medium business and is really looking quite worldly at the next 6 months or so.
Tyler, I completely agree. I know a few restaurant owners here in town. You have some of the best food around, usually the ma and pa, the little hole-in-the-wall places, and they told me themselves, if they're forced to shut down again for another 2 to 3 months, they're going to have to close their doors permanently. So we have to find a better solution than just shutting down all of these businesses. Our province's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Dina Henshaw, has written to police chiefs asking for help in enforcing the new non-voluntary COVID-19 measures that are in place. The police have said, we prefer education.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine there's a great public relations desire for the police to go and kick down doors on Christmas dinner and things like that. Now, I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking about the restrictions on serving alcohol later, for example. That was one of the other things I didn't mention off the top. As you said, the police are sort of like, well, we'd prefer not to have to do this. But they did say that, if there are flagrant violations, repeated violations, then they will step in. They do have mechanisms at their disposal. But it's just, that is another step, I think, to some extent, showing how seriously the government is trying to take this. I mean, if you'd asked people in the summer whether or not they thought police would be shutting down bars because of alcohol hours changing for the pandemic, even then, I think people would have been surprised by it. So, I think even as people are calling for lockdowns and all these other things, the government, the Chief Public Health Officer, they are doing these things that I think suggest they're taking it very, very seriously.
We live in some interesting times right now, don't we?
That we do.
Unions are calling for there to be paid leave brought back for medical workers isolating from COVID-19, and comes amidst fear from the capacity of the healthcare system to handle a further influx of sick people.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, this was Rachel Notley's lead-off question in question period on Wednesday, asking the government to bring this in. The objection is basically that you have people who get sick from COVID-19 who have to self-isolate, and you have people who, in the medical context in particular, who may have been exposed and must isolate sort of pending test results and things like that. And the concern from the unions is that they're having to use their sick banks, their banked up sick days to be off work, and they're calling for more support from the government. As you said, there is this very large concern in hospitals that they are going to be overrun by COVID patients. I mean, people talk about sort of this lag time, that if we're seeing, record-breaking new cases today, in 2 weeks or so, we're going to see more hospitalizations and things like that. And the provincial numbers in terms of ICU occupancy are at about 2/3, maybe even a little bit more right now. So, and I was speaking with a bunch of doctors and nurses this week, and they're saying, look, we're burnt out. The care of patients is, dependent on whether or not we have enough staff to be there, whether or not we have the energy to be there. So, there's some of the political stuff in the background on all this, I think, Hal, in terms of the relationship that the medical sector has with the government right now. And so that context, I think, is important here. But on the other hand, I mean, these people are clearly being, worked down to the bone, and it doesn't look like things are going to get much easier for them in the weeks to come.
You know what? I keep hearing a lot about that, about hospitals being potentially overrun, ICU units. I'd actually like to take a lipstick camera, a nice hidden camera, and just kind of walk through the hospital and see if it's actually true. Like for ourselves, actually go in there and see, are there people on gurneys outside of the hospital rooms, and just how busy it really is, right?
There was this interesting phenomenon back in the spring where people weren't going to the hospital. People who, had chest pain or something, instead of going to the ER, they'd stay away, maybe get an appointment with their family doctor. And there was people were bracing for it to be overrun with COVID patients, and then that just didn't really happen because other patients didn't come. And so some of the people I've talked to said that they're seeing a little bit of that, but they had concerns that there's a mortality bump down the road from people who say miss a cancer diagnosis. And they also said, and speaking with some people in the health minister's office, saying that one of the other things that's happening here this is a busy time of year for hospitals generally. So when we talk about capacity issues, it's not just COVID, but all these other people. You slip and break your arm on the ice or something and have to go to the emergency. So plenty of issues all percolating here. But I think you're very right about that especially depending which hospital you go to, whether that's downtown Edmonton or Calgary or a rural hospital or something like that.
More good news for Keystone XL Pipeline as TC Energy inked a deal with a coalition of Indigenous groups. Now, Tyler, if Joe Biden does in fact move into the White House in January, would that kind of jeopardize the pipeline and the thousands of jobs it would create?
Well, that's an outstanding issue, that's for sure. Joe Biden had promised that he was going to scrap the Keystone Pipeline, but as we talked about a couple weeks ago, TC Energy moved to hire contractors to build some of the U.S. portions of it, and inking this deal with First Nations. So this is, to some extent, it's a little bit of the social license argument, I think, where they can then take this to the president, to the president's advisors and say, this is the buy-in this project has. Can you really say no to these people? So, I think everyone's kind of worried about that. It's on everyone's mind, I think, but it's just a bit of a waiting game right now to see what happens in January.
Yeah, so much hangs in the balance right now, absolutely. Now, here's kind of an interesting story. The UCP put out a press release that Alberta Premier Jason Kenney rented an RV for his tour of southern Alberta this summer instead of staying in hotels. Hey, just think of all of the money saved taxpayers, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think the government said they spent about $2,300 on this trip. A couple $100 on gas, a couple grand on renting the RV, and some personal expenses. I'm not sure I would want to be driving around in an RV in the peak of summer. Maybe. I mean, the government's trying to save money, tighten belts where it can. So if the premier is willing to rough it in a RV for a few days, then good for him. But yeah, the press release just kind of landed in reporters' inboxes, and I thought, well, this is an odd, kind of strange thing to announce. But I read through it and thought, why not? $100 a night to stay in a hotel versus a couple grand for a week in an RV. It makes sense, I suppose.
I think it'd be even cooler if you said, we're staying at KOA campgrounds. We're going to be tenting it the whole way. Now, that would have been something special to talk about, right?
Would have had to send a reporter along to see if the premier knows how to cook over a fire and things like that.
Oh, there you go, pitching a tent and tearing it down. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
My pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.